All right, look at all of those. Awesome, awesome. And go ahead and keep your hands up or raise your hand if you're a board member. All right, members and non-members, please look around. We are going to have a sort of an intermission tonight in between me and the folks that are coming up next. I'll talk about that in just a minute. Please, if you have any interest in supporting our cause, and if for some reason you wandered into Flamingo Cantina without knowing what it is that we do, again, we are TXNORML, and we are going to legalize marijuana in Texas. So if that sounds interesting, please come talk to us about what you can do, you and your friends, to help us get this done sooner rather than later. And go ahead and raise your hand if tonight is your first meeting. We got to have some first-timers. Awesome! We love the first-timers. Let's hear a round of applause. Please, first-timers, come and talk to any of us. As you might imagine, based on our mission, we really are friendly folks, so you'll find that we're good folks to talk to. Okay. TXNORML has a two-part mission. One is to move public opinion sufficiently to legalize the responsible use of marijuana by adults. That part of it is pretty much already done. In terms of, even in Texas, a supermajority of Texans already favor some form of medical decriminalization or complete legalization. We just have to push the legislature over the finish line. And then our second mission is to serve as an advocate for consumers once it is fully legal, to ensure that they have access to high-quality marijuana that is safe, convenient, and affordable. We are going to have a raffle tonight at the end of the meeting, so please, if you go over and sign up, you'll be signing up to get our monthly email newsletter, but we are giving away not one, but 2 magic flights at the end of the meeting, so I'm sure everybody will be interested in that. Even if you're already a member, even if you're already on the email list, please sign up for that.
I have to go do it.
We will have that drawing, I don't know, maybe somewhere around probably less than an hour from now. So please, everybody sign up for the raffle, because that's a special little treat that we have tonight. Also, our executive director, Jax Finkel, is going to talk tonight about upcoming events. I forgot this part. Sorry, I'm doing stuff out of order. One more show of hands. Do we have any veterans in the house tonight? All right, let's have a round of applause for our veterans. And then, Dave, if you'll keep your hand up. Dave Bass is all the way there at the back. Please, veterans, go talk with Dave Bass. He is our veterans director. And we have a bunch of ways in which we can help veterans, and veterans can help us convince the Texas legislature. Veterans, of course, are given great deference when they testify in front of the legislature. We can help you do that, even if you're not interested in testifying. Maybe going and meeting your representative. Anyway, Dave Bass is the veterans go-to guy. Please talk with Dave Bass if you are a veteran. And then the other thing is, this has been a while since we've done this, but tonight we are reinstituting comedy night after we're going to have some stand-up comedians. Chad Fisher is going to be the MC, and from about 9:30 to 10, we're going to have stand-up comedy again for the first time at our monthly meetings. So we are really looking forward to that. There, again, will be a little bit of an intermission, so you can come and talk to us, and then, order your drinks. As always, let's give a round of applause to Angela and Flamingo Cantina for having us here, however many tens and tens and tens and tens of months in a row it's been. We've probably passed 100 months in a row by now at Flamingo. We're always glad to be here. Don't forget to tip your bartenders as well. All right. So tonight, I want to talk a little bit about mass incarceration. And I want to put this in the context of what the political climate is now. Yes, we like to have fun. Yes, we have awesome events that you can come to. But again, at the heart of it, we are a political organization in the sense that we are trying to change a law that is wrong. And we are a single issue organization. But in the context of the larger war on drugs, of course, many of y'all are familiar with the mass incarceration that goes on in the United States right now. I want to talk a little bit about the history of how we got where we are now. On January 17, 1961, Eisenhower, in his farewell address before the incoming Kennedy, gave a pretty famous speech. Many of y'all are aware that that's where the phrase the military-industrial complex came from. Interestingly, Eisenhower actually originally toyed with the idea of calling it the military-industrial congressional complex because he was well aware of that it's all about the money. It's all about the money. That's part of what we're going to be talking about tonight. And he warned about the corporatization and the concentration of power when it came to over-militarization. And when we're talking about mass incarceration and how we got to where we are, these two concepts are actually intertwined. Just in terms of a brief history of time, where we started and where we are now, about 10,000 years ago, 9 or 10,000 years ago, we believe that was when the first woven fabric came from hemp. I'm going to skip up many millennia and talk about in the early 1600s when the Jamestown colony, Virginia passed a law requiring farmers to grow hemp. How many of y'all knew that? Yeah, a lot of y'all. Okay, so hemp was the primary crop grown by George Washington at Mount Vernon and was the second biggest crop grown by Thomas Jefferson at Monticello. And then when we skip about another 100 years forward, we get Maine, which is the first state to outlaw alcohol, and Americans' puritanical strain starts coming through, and the American public, and specifically those that control the legislature, start realizing they can start imposing their morals on other people and deciding what it is they can and can't ingest. Again, alcohol, if you want to call them hard drugs, marijuana, all of these things stem from the same roots. In 1906, the Pure Food and Drug Act is passed, which forms the FDA. This is the first time that there's any federal oversight of drugs. In 1913, California passes a law to outlaw marijuana. The next year, the Harrison Act is passed, which outlaws opiates and cocaine. 1950, another anti-marijuana law from Utah. In 1919, the 18th Amendment to the Constitution is ratified. Who knows what the 18th Amendment was?
Prohibition?
No alcohol. Yes, that's right, prohibition. And then in 1930, a man named Harry Anslinger is given control of the new Federal Bureau of Narcotics. He remained in that position for over 30 years. He was the man really behind demonizing, well, first the Mexicans were bringing in the dirty weed, and when that tack proved unfortunately successful, he started adding the idea of jazz musicians being involved with marijuana, which of course we know what that is.
Dancing.
Well, it's barely code for anything. It's the beginning of our history of racism and various types of prohibition and mass incarceration. A few years after Anslinger is appointed, the United States realizes what a terrible, terrible policy alcohol prohibition is, and they repeal it with the 21st Amendment. But just a few years later, they pass the Marijuana Tax Act. In the 50s, they start with mandatory sentences. They start adding more severe penalties. In 1970, we see something called the Comprehensive Drug Abuse Prevention and Control Act. It actually pretty much replaced and repealed and updated all previous laws concerning narcotics and any other kind of dangerous drugs. But here we really start to see what we now know as the modern war on drugs. At this point, the enforcement, the emphasis becomes law enforcement, and this includes the Controlled Substances Act, where marijuana is, of course, classified as a Schedule I drug, reserved for the most dangerous drugs that have no recognized medical use, no value whatsoever. Then throughout the 70s, we see a ramping up of that. And in 1988, we get the Anti-Drug Abuse Act. Okay, so that was my attempt at about 400 years of American various types of going from mandatory hemp growing to where we are now. But again, remember, I want tonight's talk to be a positive one in the sense that I am a firm believer that the political climate really is changing. Probably most of y'all are familiar with more than 50% of what I just said, maybe 80, 90, 100% of those sorts of things. But I want to talk about a couple of things that have happened during political campaigns in the past that have had an effect on things, and then talk about where that can lead us to in the future. Okay, so let's jump up to 1988. In 1988, Michael Dukakis was running against George Herbert Walker Bush, the Poppy Bush, and Dukakis was staunchly anti-death penalty. I'm going to do a show of hands again. Does anybody remember the death penalty question from CNN anchor Bernard Shaw to Michael Dukakis in 1988?
I was
okay,
one.
Getting a few hands. All right. So here it is verbatim. This isn't a nationally televised debate. The CNN anchor asks, if Kitty Dukakis, that's Michael Dukakis' wife, if Kitty Dukakis were raped and murdered, would you favor an irrevocable death penalty for the killer? And you can actually go home tonight or later this weekend and go ahead and Google. It's a really famous moment. Dukakis very calmly, very unemotionally says, no, I don't, Bernard, and then just starts talking about his anti-death penalty stance. And unfortunately, while you can have your opinions on being anti-death penalty, there's tons of reasons to be against the death penalty as well. Not our topic for tonight. The manner in which the governor answered that question and seemed not to flinch, not to have any emotional reaction whatsoever to the hypothetical about his wife being raped and murdered, was something that the Republicans jumped on to paint Democrats in general as being soft on crime. And this was also in the context of Willie Horton. I'm sure I'm going to get some hands going up. Who remembers the Willie Horton ad? Okay, more people. So this is in the same context. Now, Willie Horton, for those of you that don't know, was a convicted felon who was sentenced to life for murder without the possibility of parole. And Massachusetts had a weekend furlough program. And what that meant was even murderers could get out on the weekends for a certain period of time and then turn themselves back into prison. And he went off on a furlough. He didn't return. He committed not a murder this time, but an aggravated assault, an armed robbery, and a rape while he was out on this furlough program.
In one weekend?
Again, this was the state from which Dukakis was from. The program itself had actually been instituted 15 years before Dukakis was governor. It was signed into law by a Republican governor, and it was actually extended by the Massachusetts Supreme Court to those convicted of murder. The statute was fairly poorly written by the legislature, and some lawyers managed to get it extended to their clients. Now, Dukakis was not in any way responsible for any of the things that I just said, and yet, because it happened while he was governor, again, it set up the whole dynamic of the Republicans are tough on crime, the Democrats are soft on crime. And even though there's not a good reason to blame Dukakis for it, since, as I outlined, he had nothing to do with the program itself, in politics, perception is reality, and maybe that's true in life as well. Speaking of that, if you'll just go forward to the 1992 debate, you'll remember that Bush and Bill Clinton and Perot were in a debate, and Poppy Bush, at one point, while someone else was being asked a question, looked at his watch, and that was touted as some sort of uncaringness on the part of the president, where he was too good to be at that debate. Again, that was probably not true at all. It was probably just George Bush looking at his watch, but the Republicans did a very good job in the early, mid, and late 80s of making crime a huge focus of crime prevention, a huge focus of their political platform. So, the next election, I just talked about it, Clinton, Perot, and Bush. Clinton decides that he is going to turn this around. And a lot of people look back at the 70s, the legislation that I was talking about from the 70s, and think that that's where the war on drugs started, and I think that's true. However, a lot of people forget that it was the policies from 1992 through 2000 that also ramped it up, in part because of the political strategy of triangulation. Clinton decided that he was going to take the Republicans' best issues, and instead of making a stark right, left, conservative, liberal type contrast, which I don't think necessarily even applies to incarceration in the first place, he would stake out positions that were just to the left of wherever the Republicans were, so that they couldn't hit him so hard on that. Bill Clinton had a choice to make during his 1992 campaign. This one I might not get any hands for. Who has heard of Ricky Ray Rector? Anybody? Ricky Ray Rector? Okay. Convicted murderer from Arkansas, was given the death penalty by an Arkansas jury, and his execution was set during the time period that Bill Clinton was campaigning for President of the United States in 1992. In fact, he flew home to Arkansas to oversee that execution. And about 10 years after Ricky Rector was executed under Bill Clinton's watch, about 10 years after he was executed, the Supreme Court decided a case that actually would have saved Ricky Rector. There was a case decided based on a different person, obviously, that said that it was unconstitutional to execute Ricky Rector. The reason was that Ricky Rector was severely mentally handicapped, what we would have called retarded at the time. He had unsuccessfully attempted suicide in a manner in which he had partially lobotomized himself. And the anti-death penalty crowd had not yet convinced the United States Supreme Court that people that don't know what they're doing shouldn't be executed for what they've done. That may or may not seem like a reasonable proposition that should be accepted without challenge. I will admit that I'm a criminal defense attorney, so I probably have my own bias on that. How disabled was Ricky Rector? He was able to speak, he was able to communicate with people, but there's something called being able to effectively communicate with your lawyer. I had a client this year who was eventually sent to Austin State Hospital. When I first met with him, he was extremely suspicious of me and whether or not I was even a lawyer. He did not want to talk to me about his case because he was honestly having all sorts of, he was in his early 20s. Eventually we found out that he was having the sort of breakdown that was the first episode of paranoid schizophrenia. And he was truly not able to communicate with me about the facts of his case. Now, since I'm not using his name, I can tell you he was extremely 100% both guilty of and demonstrably, provably guilty of the felonies that he had been charged with, some of which were drug offenses. But that doesn't really make any difference. You need to be able to actually, it doesn't mean anything to have effective assistance of counsel if your lawyer can't communicate with you in the first place. So exactly how mentally challenged was Ricky Rector? Well, when they brought him his last meal, he did not completely finish it, and and before they literally marched him down the hallway to the execution chamber, he asked the guard to save his dessert for later. The man did not understand what was happening to him, and he was clearly not able. That's not the type of thing that a lawyer can, communicate with their client in terms of whatever sorts of proper defenses there are. But despite this, Clinton decided that he was going to be tough on crime. And it was more important, maybe it was, for him to be elected than to do the right thing and to not execute this mentally handicapped person who eventually we came to find out it's unconstitutional to do that. So once Clinton gets elected, a few years into his presidency, they passed the 1994 Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act. That was actually authored by future Vice President Joe Biden, who was then chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee. Absolutely one of the biggest expansions of criminal justice in this nation's history in terms of upping penalties and increasing sentences. Biden at the time said, one of my objectives, quite frankly, is to lock Willie Horton up in jail. The Democrats were still terrified that somehow they would be seen as soft on crime. And so they devoted nearly $10 billion to new prisons. They instituted the federal 3 strikes and you're out rule. They created 60 new death penalty offenses and many, many new mandatory minimum sentences. They imposed drug testing on parolees. They ended Pell Grant eligibility for prisoners. They ended most inmate education funding. When my clients end up, hopefully not that often, but it does happen, going to prison, we used to call it TDC, Texas Department of Corrections. The theory of imprisonment used to be that we were going to correct behavior, and part of that was actually educating the poor and uneducated who were mostly in prison. We've done away with that because we've gone to a completely punitive stance on it. And this all starts really full bore in the 1990s. We look ahead to today, and right now the United States has 2.3 million men, women, and children in jail. 1 in 28 American children have a parent in jail or prison. African Americans for decades have been arrested at roughly 3 times the rate for drug offenses than their white counterparts, despite the fact that they both use drugs at the same rate. There are more black men in prison right now than there were male slaves in the anti-war South, and counting parolees and probationers, the criminal justice system now controls the lives of about 7 million people on a daily basis. The second part of my talk is a little bit more about what we can do about that, but for now, actually, I want to take a little break and have our executive director, Jax Finkel, come up and talk about upcoming events, and then I'll finish my speech. But please give a warm round of applause to Jax Finkel.
How are y'all doing? Okay, so I see some more people have come in since we started the meeting. I just want to make sure everybody knows that we're giving away 2 magic flights tonight. So if you're unfamiliar with the magic flight, it is a whole plant vaporizer that you can use for your smoking tobacco or whatever. So make sure you go and see Brittany over at our table and fill out one of our ballots if you want to enter the giveaway. And when I'm done talking about events, we'll pull the names out of the bucket or whatever it is. All right, so first of all, I want to give a brief recap of the Willie Nelson Puff and Putt that we had last week. I saw some of y'all there. Raise your hand if you went to the Puff and Putt. Well, y'all were not the only people that went. We had almost 700 people come to the Puff and Putt. So that was really great turnout. We were happy about that. We had over 20 different vendors. We had 6 different bands. We had 2 comedians. So it's definitely growing. We had morning and afternoon golf, and we also had disc golf. Yes, the disc golf was a lot of fun, right? Yeah, Eric set up the course. So I just want to say thank you to the board for helping put on such an amazing event. It took a lot of work that day, and all of the board really busted their butt to make it happen, as well as a ton of volunteers. I think we had about 30 volunteers that day. So thank you so much for donating your time. We raised a lot of money to be able to put on our veterans our veterans conference in the fall, and then also for some lobby days that are going to be coming up during the upcoming session. So we were really happy about that. And I feel anchored, and so I just really can't handle it. I gotta take this. Now I can pace. I feel better. Okay. All right, so a couple things that are going on. I saw some of y'all raising hands that you were a veteran. If you have not had the chance yet, please do come to Operation Track. Am I really loud? Do I need to do like this? Is this
That's
better?
perfect. That's
Okay.
good.
All right. There we go. All right, and don't move. Okay, I won't move either. So if you go over to the table and you're a veteran, you can sign our letter to the governor. We're requesting a meeting with him to meet with a veteran from each conflict all the way back to the Korean War. And so we've got, I think, over 700 signatures so far on that letter. And so please do add your name to it if you're able. Also, we're collecting pill bottles to represent veterans who would like to be able to use cannabis as a safer alternative to some of the pharmaceuticals that they're prescribed. David Bass is over at the table right now. There's David. So please see him if you're interested in learning a little bit more about Operation Track. And that's going to be going on all the way till Veterans Day in November. And we're going to do a display and a press conference. And then we're actually going to do an educational display in the hearing hallway at the Capitol. And we're going to have all of the bottles out to represent veterans across Texas. So that'll be very empowering. Vincent Lopez was our Director of Veterans Outreach. And we are happy to say that we will be having a PACT meeting. He founded PACT, Patient Alliance for Cannabis Therapeutics. It's a group that empowers and supports patients so that they're able to really have impactful testimony and interactions with legislators at the Capitol. And the meeting is going to be on Monday, the 11th of April. It's going to be in the Capitol building in room E2.010. And it's going to be from 11 to 3. There's going to be patient training. There will be some a short tour around the Capitol. There's an agenda online for it if you want to take a look. And then after that, we're going to be at Reggae Fest. Who's been to Reggae Fest before? It's so much fun. 3 days of people just kind of smoking and eating whatever they want and listening to really good music. So it's going to be great. We are still looking for some volunteers to help at our table. So if you're interested in volunteering, you can go to Give Pulse and find out what different shifts we have available there. Oh, is Betty here? Betty! Betty's here!
Betty!
Okay, so also Betty can assist you if
That
you'd
is
like
so
to
Betty.
have some volunteer fun with TXNORML. And at the end of April, on the 30th, we're going to be doing a muscle walk. And it's going to be in Pflugerville. We're walking in honor of Vincent Lopez. And we're going to be raising money for research for Becker's muscular dystrophy, which is what Vincent suffered from. And so it's going to be an event through Team Hope Through Cannabis, Team THC. It's an athletics event, but it is a walk, so it's pretty low-key. So if you guys would please go online, sign up to participate, and come and walk for Vincent. It would mean a lot to us and his family if you would do that. And then in May, we'll be back here at the Flamingo Cantina, holding our monthly meeting. First Wednesday every month, we're here. So make sure you come and hang out. We will have a different array of agenda, and then we'll have the Mau Maus, which if you haven't stayed till the end, the Mau Maus put on a pretty awesome show. Let's see what else. Oh, the Marijuana March. Did you know that we have been doing the Marijuana March for 9 years? This is going to be our 9th year. That's insane. I hope next year is like the last one, but yeah, I doubt it. We'll probably be marching for rights for a while, but we have to really show up. This is the capital, and while Austin may not have a really high population of people here, this is where all the legislators are. And so it's really important that everybody show up. So we're actually coordinating with other chapters across the state. They're going to be having their marches on the actual Global Marijuana March Day, which is going to be May 7th. And they're going to be marching in their individual cities all across Austin. Then they're going to be caravanning the following weekend up to Austin so that we can have as many chapters as possible represented here at the Capitol. So we're really grateful that they're willing to organize this with us and come, some of them are coming from like the Rio Grande Valley and El Paso. I mean, that's going to be awesome to have everyone here. So we'll be starting at City Hall, we'll be walking up Congress all the way to the South Capitol steps. We'll have some speakers speaking there, and then afterwards we're arranging an after social at a different location. So we'll have all that information online. And then we'll be back here in June again to do it all over again to tell you guys what's going on. There's going to be quite a bit of things happening over the summer. There's currently some verbiage for a medical bill being worked on, so we're hoping to have more information for that for you guys coming up soon. And there is a lot of talk about bills and who's going to sponsor what bill. So I encourage you, even though the elections haven't even happened yet, still go out and be talking with your legislators about this issue. Because if they are reelected, it's important that you already have that pre-existing relationship. So please make sure that you're going out and doing that while we're trying to prepare up at the Capitol with some good bills. And there's going to be some legislators that surprise us. Like David Simpson last session out of like left field. Let's just repeal marijuana prohibition. All right, that sounds good. And no one really knew he was going to do that. Which, by the way, he is in a primary runoff race in May. So he's running against Brian Hughes. So if you know anyone in the Longview area, definitely let them know about that race because it could directly affect cannabis law reform in Texas. So on that note, I think if you have not signed up for the Magic Flight, that you're out of luck. Brittany, will you bring me the bucket of names?
Not mine.
Frank Force.
Oh yeah!
One more. Okay, shake it up a little bit though. Shake it up. Okay. Ready?
Stir it.
I'm reaching down at the bottom.
Pick from the bottom.
Like,
Yeah.
what's this one? Way down here.
Not mine.
Wesley Diaz. Is Wesley Diaz still here? All right. Frank and Wesley, y'all come and meet me up at the table, all right? And now, back to your regularly scheduled program of the Military Industrial Complex by Jamie Spencer.
All right, guys. So there has been a recent backlash politically about mass incarceration. It is an issue that we are seeing on literally both sides of the aisle, and if you want to count libertarians as a third aisle, on all three aisles. Part of the purpose of this talk tonight is to give you some talking points in terms of when we are communicating with our legislators, if they need a little push or a reason to do the right thing, we're here to give them those reasons, not for our sake, but for their other constituents. In other words, to give them the courage to do the right thing. And actually, of course, we're in a red state, but Republicans in Texas have actually mounted what I would call an organized three-prong approach, a critique of the system's failings. One is fiscal, that the prison system right now is just too expensive. The next one is libertarian, that the system is an authoritarian nightmare. And I think most folks are familiar with those arguments. But the third one is sort of the new one in the mix, and it's probably not one that the liberals or lefties were necessarily thinking of. But this has become a statewide Republican push, and that is the moral or the religious reasons that criminals deserve forgiveness, and that it is actually wrong to incarcerate people for lengthy periods of time for nonviolent offenses. And actually, Texas is a shining example of reform to the extent that there's been any reform in any of the states. In the mid-90s, Texas led the country in per capita incarceration. And of course, Texas is a big state, but per capita is the important word there. Texas led the country in per capita incarceration. But in 2007, Governor Perry and the Republican-controlled legislature were facing a huge budget problem, and they passed more than a dozen reforms during that legislative session that saved about $2 billion in prison construction and operating costs. Now, if you take the money away from the prisons, there's going to be fewer prisons, fewer jails, fewer beds. And indeed, the state shut down 3 juvenile detention centers. They cut the youth prison population by 53%. And they allocated hundreds of millions of dollars to alternative drug treatment programs for folks that were hooked on some of the, as we said, harder drugs. And in 2016, I think these stats actually may be from 2014, I'm happy to report that 7 years after those reforms, which were just small reforms towards where we need to go, crime rates in Texas are at their lowest levels since 1968. Now, back to both the financial and the moral aspect of it, there is essentially an unholy alliance between big government and big business when it comes to the prison industrial complex. We actually have a long United States history of this as well. In the 1600s, the English began shipping convicts to Virginia and essentially selling them as indentured servants to various people who could buy them. And then after Reconstruction, when the slaves were freed, labor plantations were the economic power of the South, but the non-slave states, primarily of course the North, didn't have that. And so prison labor actually powered huge portions of the late 19th century northern economy. San Quentin, a very famous prison, was initially operated as a for-profit enterprise. Basically, convict labor was something that was used in the 19th century and then throughout the beginning of the 20th century. And the war on drugs took this to a new level. Private prisons, which cost less and were built faster than government projects, could outpace their governmental counterparts. In 1990, I'm going to say this one twice. In 1990, there were roughly 7,000 inmates in private facilities throughout the nation. 7,000. By 2009, just under 20 years later, that number had grown to 130,000, and it has climbed substantially since. From 7,000 people in private prisons in 1990 to 130,000 people in 2009. Right now, about 10% of our jail beds are for-profit. Some states are as high as 44%. And whenever there's big business, you often see this confluence of power. There are, depending on how you look at it, really only 2 or 3 major private prison corporations that operate in the United States. In 1983, the Corrections Corporation of America, I'm going to call them CCA, had grown to the 5th largest jailer in the country. It currently holds 85,000 inmates, and only the federal government, the state of California, the state of Florida, and the state of Texas hold more prisoners than this one company. If it were a state, it would be the 4th largest state in terms of how many prisoners it incarcerates for their shareholders' profits. The other huge player is a company called the Geo Group. They have about 78,000 inmates currently. That's actually across the world. They have about a third of those are probably in the United States. Now, since 2006, that second company, the Geo Group, their stock has quadrupled. And CCA's stock has doubled. It is extremely profitable for these companies to run these businesses. Total revenues worldwide were $1 billion in 2001. 10 years later, revenues were $3 billion. And again, they're on the rise. So those two companies have about 75% of all the private prison beds in the United States, and another company has about 15%. So between these three companies, they make up 90% of our for-profit prison industry. Now, I'm going to go back to show of hands. This may seem a little out of context, but I'm making the point. Who knows what REITs are? Does anybody remember from the bubble? Real estate investment trusts. Where did I hear that? Yes, real estate investment trusts. So why am I talking about something boring like that? Through deregulation, the two big companies that I've been talking about were allowed to call themselves REITs. Yes, they have absolutely nothing to do with real estate, but it basically deals with them being able to avoid the corporate tax, and they have bribed the they've lobbied the federal legislators to allow them to be taxed at incredibly low rates by, I don't even understand it, somehow pretending that they're real estate investment trusts. Obviously, they have huge tracts of land, as Mel Brooks would say. So I don't know what to do but to stammer and stutter on that one, but it's an example of their lobbying power. CCA spends millions of dollars on lobbying firms to supposedly educate federal, state, and local officials on the benefits of partnership programs.
Whoa!
On the hello.
Wake up!
All right. So these corporations claim, and this is I'm going to read from their statement, that as a matter of long-standing corporate policy and practice, they never lobby for or against policies or legislation that would determine the basis for an individual's incarceration or detention. That's
Bullshit.
they're trying to claim that all of that lobbying money doesn't go towards increasing mandatory minimums and those sorts of things. However, I'm not going to bore you with the names of them, but if anybody cares, I can share my paper here with you. A bunch of organizations that they donate to lobby on a regular basis for longer prison sentences and those sorts of things. Here's another part of the scam. Contractual occupancy quotas, known as capacity guarantees. When these companies enter into contracts with the state of Texas and with others, and this is a perfect thing to talk to your legislator about, they make it a part of the contract that there is a minimum number of inmates that the government must supply to them. That means they get paid whether or not the beds are filled. So, when you hear people, if somebody tries to say that the public sector is going to be better at doing this because of free enterprise, that's great, but that's not free enterprise, right? That's the government predetermining, giving a contract to a private prison corporation that then tells them that no matter how they run the prison, doesn't matter what they do, they're going to get a minimum number of dollars, so they may as well build the extra facilities. And honestly, it's like Field of Dreams. If you build it, they will come. You build the prisons, we're going to fill them up. it actually shifts all risk away from the private industry themselves. They're going into these contracts already knowing the minimum level of profit that they're going to get. That's something that conservative, fiscally conservative, libertarian-leaning, Tea Party, Republican legislators probably do actually care about. If we can pull the rug out from under the private prison industry, we will have made great inroads in our eventual mission in terms of stopping incarceration for marijuana and making it completely legal. All right. There are other scams involved. For example, who here has ever had a friend that went to jail and called them from the jail? Anybody? Come on, not you. I mean, maybe you tried to call someone from the jail. Anybody? All right. So you get a collect call from jail, right? And it's your buddy. So you press yes to accept the charges. Does anybody want to tell me what they remember their phone bill being for that 3-minute phone call? $10. What are you? Yeah, more like 20 now probably. It probably costs inmates. They are charging inmates and inmates' families, who by definition don't have very much money, tons and tons of money for these phone calls. And what happens is, again, private phone companies come in. They set up these systems where people have to, if they want to be able to communicate with their loved ones, they have to pay these exorbitant rates. Again, I think that's something that Texas legislators may care about. So, primarily, what I'm hoping that you've gotten from tonight is that we can sell not only the money savings aspect, but getting rid of the dirty corporate corruption that is part of mass incarceration, the war on drugs, and of course the war on marijuana users. Criminal justice is a business, and business is good, but when it comes to marijuana, we're going to put them out of business. All right, my time is up here, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to take about a 20-minute break, and then Chad Fisher, who I saw walk in a while back. Chad.
He's probably upstairs.
Oh, we're not done.
So yes, Chad Fisher is here, and he will be up here momentarily. However, look, I have a bird. Yay! Also, I wanted to segue. Look at this cute animal. This cute animal says that you should go join TXNORML right now. Go join and become a member. Right? Is that what Quick says? So seriously though, you guys join. We do members mixers every year. You can get discounted rates into certain events that we do. You'll get all of our updates, and different packages come with like shirts and jars. We have 2 new jars, by the way. They're really pretty.
Yeah.
So go over to the table and become a member, and we're going to take a break and maybe saunter up to the patio, and then we'll come back down and listen to Chad Fisher. He's going to do some comedy for us before the Mau Mau's go on. So everybody go to the patio.